And welcome to our presentation on commercializing research and innovation. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So to begin with, we're going to discuss 3 different university commercialization processes. And we have compared and contrasted the resources required, the critical success factors, and the common barriers for these processes. We're then going to move on to the different types of IP outputs produced through these processes, and we've got 2 different case studies looking at how this IP can be leveraged. So we've got one case study looking at spin-out companies and one case study looking at licensing. We're then going to move on to compare the university processes to what happens in the private sector, and finally we're going to conclude by looking at the suitability of the university processes in the current environment, and then make our recommendations on how these processes can be improved. So to begin with, we've looked at 3 different universities: the University of Sheffield, the University of Oxford, and the MIT. And we decided to look at the MIT so we could contrast between UK and US establishments. So Tony's going to talk about Sheffield.
Yeah, hi there. So I will present University of Sheffield. So there are 5 stages of the commercialization process. The first one is the creation, so you need to have an idea, and you submit a paper, and you're gonna be assigned a manager. The second stage is the evaluation. So assessment of the IP position is made at state of development, and initial market research is made in that evaluation stage. After that is protection. How can you protect the IP? Maybe you can develop a prototype, clarification of the IP ownership. And after that is the validation. So if the idea is gonna be feasible, then it just goes in the final stage, utilization. So you can decide if you want to make spin-out company or to license your idea. So now I'm going to pass to Abir, who's going to tell you about Oxford University.
I'm just going to take you through the commercialization process of the University of Oxford. It takes through 6 steps of commercialization. The first one being building a disclosure pipeline. Then there's the evaluation of the project, validating commercial value, translating the research into an actual product, finding commercial partners, and building a spin-out business or a licensing. The general intermediate steps are pretty similar to the way that Sheffield handles them, but some unique points about the way the Oxford commercialization process works is the fact that they start the paperwork for the patents and things like that very early. As you can see, it's their first step there. They start building the disclosure pipeline from the very beginning. Another unique point about the University of Oxford is the fact that they have a dedicated company that the University of Oxford owns called ISIS, and through that, after the initial validations have been done, they take you through the commercialization process. The thing about ISIS is the fact that it also works with other universities and works with some private sector as well, so it provides a great networking system for the commercialization of new IP. I'm going to pass it on to Orlando for MIT.
Our last example is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This commercialization process has 10 steps. The first, the research pre-disclosure and innovation disclosure involve research activity and a contact with the technology office to be formal the technology transfer process. After that, we have the assessment and protection, and here they writing a doc and try to start thinking and search the possible IP to protect the new idea. After that, we have marketing, where it may involve contact with an existing company or forming a startup. After that, we have the license and commercialization, MIT and a third part signing an agreement, and design may business with the new product. And finally, the revenue. Well, the revenue from licenses of MIT are distributed to inventors, research, and departments. It means they reinvent in research and education. And now, Andrew, Tony.
So, again, I will present the common resources required, the commonalities between the 3 universities, So what we found was that we need the idea first of all. And after that is the IP protection strategy. So how, what kind of IP, what kind of protections we put on the idea that we have, like copyright or patent and so on. Commercialization strategy is another good resource required. You need to know the steps that you're going to take in the near future. The business plan is by setting the goals and to have a plan in the future and how you're going to make revenue from this idea. And you need to find investment and funding, so you need to find maybe a venture capitalist or business angels that's going to help you at the early stages of the idea. So now I can pass it to Ethan to present you critical success factors.
So we found quite a few similarities between the critical success factors. Firstly, it's important that the idea is original, so it can find a place in the market, and it's also important that it's feasible, so we'll be able to get enough money and do it in enough time to actually pass it through to the customers. And it's also important to clarify that IP ownership. So in the case that the university might put some money into the IP, who owns what, how much do they own? And at the start, it's also critical to assess the technology readiness level. So is the project developed enough that it could actually be transferred into a product for consumers, or does it need more work? And finally, it's very important to do market research to establish the potential product. So, is there a market for it? And then moving on to the barriers. So, market research can also be used to establish potential barriers. So, it can help us determine is there any companies that have a monopoly of the market, or if the market's dying. Which also leads on to the fact that does a better solution exist? So this market research can tell us that if our product will provide a better solution. Also, a huge barrier can be funding. So if you can't get an investment or partner to invest in your project to give you funds to be able to develop it and turn it into a business, then you're not going to be able to go anywhere. And this kind of links to license interest. So if you're going to go down the license route, can you get companies interested in your product? Does it provide a new feature to them that they haven't already got? Does it solve something better to them? And finally, a huge barrier can be time commitment. So if researchers are spending all day researching, have they got time to actually create a spin out, set up the business models, find the customers? And now I'll pass on to Samir to talk about the differences.
So through the three examples that we presented, we wanted to see if there was any differences in them. And the main differences is in Sheffield they provided a commercialization manager or a mentor throughout the IP process or the commercialization process. That could have improved the way the IP could have been commercialized through the steps. There's also potential barriers over here in the UK where they found it harder to find investments, and most of the IPs that did get into commercialized, they usually ended up getting investments from America or being bought over by American companies. Also, we found that American companies had much more experiences in spin-outs and licensing, so they did things better. So that could have been a potential barrier over here for UK IPs. Just a slight difference in the MIT is that most of the revenue that they got back from their IPs, they reinvested it back into additional research, which maybe furthered the investment of other researchers that are coming next to be commercialized. Before we go into the two case studies, just a brief explanation of all the different types of IPs there is. There's copyright, trademark, patents, and design. Copyright is an automatic right where it protects literary works. Trademarks, it defines the product name where it protects the logo. Patents is where it protects the invention or the right to have the invention exclusively. And then there is the automatic right of the design where it protects the physical appearance, where there's also where you register the design where you protect the blueprints or how the design is actually put together. So coming into the first case study, to London.
Well, the first example is the Faith Focus. Faith Focus is a company that born in the University of Sheffield and was established in 2012. Well, the idea was a microscope without a lens. This used mathematics and light sensor instead of lens after a computer built patterns to show the image. Well, these companies raised 5.7 millions of pounds. And why they decide to create a spin-out? Well, because they have the perfect scenario. They create a completely new product, and they have a lot of investors interested in this idea. So they discover a potential new market. And now Andrew is talking about licensing.
Okay, so the second case study looks at licensing, and this piece of technology was developed by the University of Oxford in 1997, and it's a non-invasive prenatal testing. They patented this technology and decided to license it out in 2005 to a company called Sequenom. And the potential reasons why they decided to follow the licensing route could be because they had a lack of experience or support within the university to create a spin-out company from it. They may have also decided that they didn't want to go down the development route of taking the research into a commercialized product, so just saw licensing as a quicker way to get some return on the piece of research. And also the scope of the product is quite limited, and the market in which it would be put into is dominated by a few large companies, and so they may have thought that the cost of in fact setting up a spin-out would outweigh the benefits of just licensing it.
I'm going to talk you guys through the difference between the private and public sector. Mostly the commercialization processes are pretty similar in the fact that they go through the same type of steps. They would all carry out steps into protecting their IP. They would all do their market research and product feasibility. But some key differences between the way the private sector approaches things and the way the universities approach things is that in the private sector, any research and design is completely oriented around profit, and they will base it on what is high in public demand. Another key difference between the private sector and the public sector is that the private sector, whenever they need new IP, they will try and acquire it through buying out another company that provides that already. So an example of that is what Facebook has acquired through buying out WhatsApp. Another key difference in the private sector and the public sector is that they also invest in something that they see a potential benefit in, and that is will be probably useful to them in the near future. An example is Google's investment in Robot Maker. They also invest heavily in marketing, which is not quite as often done in the universities. So an example of that is how all the Apple products are marketed very well before that. The private sector also focuses heavily on licensing when they do have IP, and also on joint ventures, such as Microsoft licensing Windows. Overall, to just conclude, we looked through some examples from universities, we compared and contrasted them, and then we also looked at the private sector. Some of the recommendations we'd like to make towards this model would be that to borrow from the private sector to improve the model of the universities, it would be good to try joint ventures. So perhaps joining up the universities would be a good idea because it would increase the skill set, so the products would be better developed and probably reach the market faster. Another recommendation is that we think that you should protect your IP before doing any publication, because you want to maintain your competitive advantage. So if you do wish to commercialize your research later on, you have a higher potential that way. And the thing that we'd like to recommend is one of the potential barriers is getting funding for your research to change it into commercial products. And this funding is a critical success factor in any commercialization process. So we think that crowdfunding might be a way to improve the process. It would be a new way of funding added to it. An example is the process like Kickstarter would be that kind of style. We'd like to borrow from the University of Sheffield and take the fact that they provide a mentor for the commercialization process, and we think that this would be a really good idea, because if we were to pair up researchers with people from the business department, it would be good. They would fulfill the knowledge gap between the two spaces, and be able to get better commercial awareness out of this. Another idea that we came across was the fact that we could have more research open days. It would be a good idea that if the researchers and perhaps venture capitalists were to sign a non-disclosure agreement previously, it would be a good idea to show potential funds the research that's being conducted in the university, because sometimes researchers won't be able to see the commercial potential, but other people would be able to. So that's our recommendations on how to improve the university process that's already existing. Some references and questions.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, let's pick up on a couple of things there then. You talked about the mentor. At which point do they bring a mentor in? And what do you think it's actually giving that's missing?
Oh, okay, I take that. Yeah. So in the Sheffield case, they're bringing the mentor at when you submit your idea. So after you submit the idea, it's like the first stage of validation. They give you a mentor. So you have the mentor next to you in the time that you have to choose the right IP. So the whole process of licensing or the whole process of.
How many mentors?
I'd like to add to that, and the fact that I think that although Sheffield adds it near when you're actually commercialising it, it might be worthwhile to have that mentor in from an earlier stage, because you could start seeing the commercial benefits of the whole scenario. You could gauge it from the beginning, you could see where it's going. It would probably benefit to start earlier. So as an improvement, I would.
Well, it may do, but what's the downside?
What is the downside of it?
Yeah. How do you think this goes from, how many disclosures do they have at Sheffield, and how many businesses do they actually have coming out the other end?
I'm not sure if there's statistics, but I think they have about 33 spin-outs as the general number.
They have, what, 38?
I think they have 33 spin-outs for sure.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the rest. I don't know how many disclosures they have.
Yeah, but it's going to be a lot more, isn't it,
Yeah,
as those
probably,
three?
for
So
sure.
I suppose it's the thing, what I'm getting at is having a mentor, especially with the different people that early on, even earlier as you suggest, could be a bit of an overhead.
If you were to get some advice in there and then see if it's not worthwhile, it could be stopped earlier as well in terms of trying to commercialise it. But the thing is that if you don't evaluate it early enough or won't even see the benefit of it, you're going to miss out on a commercial possibility there.
So, $64 million question then. What is the mentor actually seeing that
If
nobody else
they,
is?
If they collaborate and they can, in the sense that there's a research there, and so the researcher knows most about their field and the mentor would know about the business field, they might be able to bridge the gap and see where there is potential application for this. I don't think most researchers would have that much knowledge about the market and know where the gaps are.
There's an interesting, it's the business knowledge, and then there's the market knowledge. And the business knowledge is probably similar in a lot of cases, isn't it? Academics will have the same sort of blind spot, in terms of the business. But you could have someone who's a bit more generic taking them through it. But the market knowledge, that's the difference. Which mentor to get to talk to them. The earlier you're doing it, so one of the things to think about, isn't it? How do you get them to a point where what I need is a mentor who has experience in this industry?
I guess if it was combined with the open research days, and they're speaking to venture capitalists about their product, and they can get ideas about the market, right? And
that's interesting. That was tried. I'm not saying it was the best experiment ever set up in the world, but they did try to get graphene PGR students, postgraduate students, and postdocs in the same room as MBA students. Now there could be a million things wrong with that, in terms of whether that was the best thing to do. But it's an approach where then they basically a little bit of a matchmaking thing, sort of speed dating. You get them to sort of speak about what their research is, and you get to see people stick. So you're on the right track there.
Interesting point you mentioned that industry are much more focused on marketing compared with universities. Sort of why might that be the case?
What do you mean by marketing?
Yeah.
I think different motivations. So the company's in it for profit, whereas the researchers are in it for curiosity and just discovery and passing on knowledge.
If they're not in it for profit,
I think like
Not as much as the companies. The first, like, the initial conception, the idea is if we got customers, they'll want this product.
I think
It's a bit different.
they also market it differently, where a business is trying to sell the product, where universities are trying to like get across the information where this product might have this kind of application in the industry and market it in that kind of sense. Where
Yeah,
Do you know what I
I mean, yeah, but I think it's also is different objectives.
Yeah.
You know, companies have a commercial, focus. They've got to get products out, whereas from universities, it's a benefit, obviously. And I also think probably the development of the products in companies is a lot sharper than
Yeah.
it necessarily is from a university perspective. 'Cause it takes them a lot longer to get to market.
Well, I suppose that's the key points to bring out. In marketing in its broadest sense is not just trying to push what you have on for the people, it's actually trying to find out what they need. So it's more that maybe the businesses are more acutely commercially aware. The need to sell product means that, like we've said this morning, you need to actually find a customer who has the money, has a need that they want to pay for, a solution. And so they're just more geared up to doing that. But how they actually go about, that's, it's always talking in these broad terms, it's how do they actually do it? If I could ask one final question on my part at least. You selected a number of different models. You explained why you picked the MIT one, but why Sheffield and Oxford? Why did you pick those two? Did you look at any again? I suspect you didn't.
Oxford were successful in their commercialisation process, so I think they had over 100 spin-outs and a lot of licensing.
Right.
And Sheffield, it had a lot of information about the process, so we could get into the finer details of it.
And
That sounds good. I like the way you rested that. Well, that one was easier to research, so we did it. But actually, getting into the finer details is where you need to get to. No, that's good.
And on top of that, Sheffield had just around 33 spin-outs, so we wanted to see to compare why.
Yeah.
Okay,
Success
of course,
versus,
it's Oxford, but why what's the different model that they have, and why is so many less spin-outs in Sheffield?
I mean, that's
Still,
definitely an
course,
area to
yeah.
think about. Is one, aggregating the models. Are there, any exemplars out there, or sort of the normal model, and it's backed up by some research which is pointing to this is what the normal model looks like. But then trying to find people at either end of the scale to sort of tease out where the differences are and why some people seem to have more impact than others.
It'd be interesting to look at some of the new emerging universities that, I mean, Oxford's been there for a long, long time. Look at some of the very, very new institutions that have maybe just given higher educational status. I mean, what are they doing in terms of the translation of the technology? Have they analysed, like you've done, some of the best practice within commercialisation, and what are they doing? Are they looking at the models of success, or are they looking at drawing together different models? That might give you a good insight.
I think it's fair to point out that
Yeah.
I think it's fair to point out that the model itself is just their guideline for you to kind of take your your IP through the commercialization, but essentially it's all down to the brand or the reputation of the university. People are going to go to Oxford because they know smart people over there, and more likely going to be making things that are worth commercializing. So you need to kind of
particular areas probably that they're working on.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
good.
thank you very much indeed.